Hello and welcome to OLA 2020. Thank you so much for joining us for this session, Human Resources, How to Get the Most Out of this Two-Letter Department. My name is Jessica Gibbons and I'm the current chair of Membership Engagement. I'm so happy to moderate this session for you today. And I'm joined by our session presenter, Jolene Poor. Jolene is the director of the Ada Public Library and has over 13 years of combined experience in both public and academic libraries, as well as significant professional experience in the corporate business and human resources fields. In addition to developing and instructing much of the adult programming available at the Ada Public Library, she has taught undergraduate and graduate classes as an adjunct professor at East Central University. She's currently the president of Pontotoc County Literacy Coalition and past president of East Central University's Linscheid Library Academic Friends. I'll be back at the end of the session with a Q&A for Jolene, but in the meantime, I will turn it over to her.
My name is Jolene Poor. I am the director here at Ada Public Library, and why I wanted to put together this presentation is because quite often in presentations at OLA, human resources come up, and it'll be asked your human resources department. Many of us don't have human resources departments, or we may not know when we need to contact our human resources department or what they do. And I just wanted to put together a little bit of information about what human resources is and some tips and tricks you can use yourself and when to contact them. So like Jessica mentioned, my history started out, my first job ever was at Kennedy Library in Conowal. They merged 3 libraries, elementary, high school, and public into one library. They brought the boxes in of books, dumped them in the floor because they needed the boxes to go back and refill. So we literally started that library from scratch. What we did after that was actually automated it. So that was my first experience with automation. Through college, I worked in the cataloging department at East Central. And then I went into the corporate world after graduating. I've moved to Miami, Florida. I have worked everything from Port Everglades, which is Fort Lauderdale, bringing in or working with the Pilots Association, bringing in cruise ships, to working with the fire departments, opening outlet malls, to Coca-Cola Enterprises, and working special events and fountain routes through Miami up through Boca Raton. Worked long distance phone companies for whose patrons are predominantly Iranian or wanting to call into Tel Aviv. Worked with attorneys, and prior to going back into libraries, I worked for a company that upgraded memory for computers. Needless to say, there's a couple of reasons I'm sharing this. This much information is one, I have had quite a bit of experience observing other companies and organizations, and two, my last experience with Edge, which was a memory upgrade company, is I experienced not only laying off people, but being laid off myself. So I have multiple layers of experience with human resources. So going through and seeing different aspects of different companies, I realized really pretty quick that, you know, your employees are your backbone of your organization. And how well they produce or productive, and their attitude is generally how well your organization, company, nonprofit, whatever it is going to be successful. And one of those things is due to your cost. I just got my budget for the 2021 fiscal year, which starts actually this week. And 80% of my budget goes straight to employees, either through salary, benefits, taxes, FICA, or training. So that is a significant aspect of my budget, is going through to employees directly. If you compare that to your household income or your household finances, most people spend between 25 and 40% for housing. You're going to spend probably 10 to 25% on your car payment. So you are actually spending more on your employees than you are on your housing and transportation, on your personal budget. So this is a big chunk of money. Another thing that is interesting is you can spend anywhere from $2,500 to $7,000 to replace an entry-level employee, and that is minimum wage or slightly above. One of the things, and the difference in this has to do a lot with how big a pool you have for potential employees, but also minimum wage is different. I think it's pretty much the same throughout Oklahoma, but it can vary between city, county, state. Right now, I think $7.25 is the federal minimum wage, but there can be a difference in minimum wages in different locations. So what comes up with this? Loss of productivity from the person who is actually missing. Also, we have am I muted? Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. I just had a mute button pop up on my screen. As well as lost productivity because morale goes down. You have overtime costs, you have additional labor from supervisors, you have the recruiting costs, you have the training costs. It all goes on, and those may come out of a general fund or general pool, may not come out of your budget directly, but my budget comes from the general pool. So if there's more money in that general pool to pull from, I get a larger cut of the pie, so to speak. So I want to keep my turnover rate as low as possible. So how are some ways we can do that? Well, there's actually, let me talk about human resources and my experience with human resources, and why I found this so interesting is I call it the Goldilocks effect, or the Goldilocks of human resources. You basically have three types of human resources. You have the too cool. This is the group that is unengaged, has no power. Usually management will run over them. Quite often these organizations will end up spending a lot of time with either being sued, wrongful terminations. You end up with situations like that. You've got your too hot. This is your overengaged, or your micromanaging department. Everybody freaks out because HR is in the room. Don't want it to be like that. You want your human resources department to be just right. And in theory, and your best outcome is you're going to have a balance between management and employees. They are going to be a liaison sometimes. They're going to work with all factors within the organization for training, making sure everybody's rights are met, needs are met, and there's growth within the organization. So recruiting, that's your first step in HR. And I broke this down kind of as if I was presenting it to entry level or early in their career supervisors. So hopefully this isn't too elementary for some people. If it is, I apologize in advance. But recruiting 101 is take the time to find the right person, not a person. We want to keep that turnover rate low. It will create a better environment. And I've done this. I think most entry-level supervisors who are left to their own devices are in a hurry to fill that position. We've got to get it filled. Take a little bit of time, find the right person. You need to start with a job description. And there's this myth out there that job descriptions are never changed. And if you've seen an old job description, you'll understand what I mean. They are evolving. Libraries are evolving. Positions in the library are evolving. Job descriptions need to evolve with them. When you do the job description updates, you need to make sure that requirements for the position are what we call bona fide. They are things that absolutely need to be required to be able to do the job. One of the things that is quite often put out there is need a driver's license, for example. I don't need a driver's license to do my job. If I can get myself to work and to fulfill my job duties required by transportation, I don't have to have a driver's license. So we need to keep that in consideration, because we could actually be eliminating some very good potential candidates for job positions just because we are asking for something that's not required. And maybe we want to reevaluate who does need a driver's license. For example, if the job you're recruiting for requires someone to do a mail run, you have an excellent candidate that doesn't have a driver's license, maybe you would want to possibly switch some job duties out, sit down, talk with your current staff, see what shifting could be done to make that accommodation. That brings me up to reasonable accommodations. Now, this has to do with the American Disabilities Act, I believe of 1965. I'd have to go back and check for sure. But making accommodations for individuals with handicaps so that they have the opportunity to be gainfully employed. What are reasonable accommodations? It could be adjusting a table, ordering a larger screen. Maybe today with the way computers allow you to in larger fonts, that's really not an issue. Maybe they need to have a magnifier on amplifier on a phone. Maybe they need a specific keyboard. Things like that are reasonable accommodations, including a ramp, adding a handrail. Those things are reasonable accommodations. Massive remodels of a facility or just massive disruption of production is usually not considered reasonable accommodations. What I would encourage anybody in that situation to definitely speak to your human resources department, or if you don't have one, whoever your legal counsel is for your organization. You want to be within compliance, but it isn't designed to be an undue hardship on an organization to meet those reasonable accommodations. Interview like a librarian. We interview people all day long. We'll have people come in. They ask us questions such as, I need a book on horses, and by the time you get through interviewing them, they actually need one that has a pattern for a wooden rocking horse. It can be that crazy sometimes. So we know how to interview people, and we just need to make sure that we ask the right questions. With that in mind, there's some things that are off limits. I'm going to grab a drink here. Excuse me. Age, gender, sexual orientation, marital status, children, health, transportation, and religion are a few, predominantly most of them. I would also go so far as to not ask somebody what pronoun they want to be referred to as. Those things are really not important in probably 99.9999% of job interviews. There are a few from time to time that would require this type of knowledge, but it's for library purposes, I would be very surprised if you came across one. However, you can have some concerns. Somebody comes in with a cane or in a wheelchair, and you know that the job position is shelving, and they are going to have to stand all day or 4 hours a day and shelve and reach over their head, or bend down and shelve a bottom shelf, you can ask those type questions and usually just refer it based on your job description. This job requires you to spend up to 4 to 6 hours a day on your feet. It requires bending multiple times to shelve books on a bottom shelf, which is 4 to 6 inches off the floor, and to shelve items above your head as high as X, Y, and Z. Can you do this job task? And that's okay to ask. You're asking directly about a job requirement that's in the job description. If they feel their health will allow them to do that, then they've answered the question. You can do the same about children and transportation. If you're worried about someone not being able to work weekends, just ask them. This job requires you to be here every other Saturday from 9 o'clock to 6. Is that going to be a problem? If you see yourself running into a series of situations where people commit to doing things and then they're not able to, and you have a situation where you're either having to terminate people because they're not fulfilling job duties or something like that, you can just talk to your HR department and see if you can add something into the agreement contract when you hire somebody where they have read and initialed. Again, we've told you this once, but now we got it in writing. You're going to have to be able to do these things, and that can give you a little bit more validation if it comes down to a situation needing to terminate someone. Hopefully it won't. Hopefully we have good hires, but we are going to have some that aren't so good from time to time. Trying to avoid that, planning ahead. If you are going to do a panel interviews type session, plan ahead who's going to do what, who's going to do the introduction, who's going to do the closing, what's going to happen afterwards. You want to look like you know what you're doing, even if you feel like you don't. And you want to be consistent in your questions. You want to have set up questions. You want to make sure that you ask each participant in the interview process those questions. You want to be as fair as possible. One thing that I find very useful is employment or pre-employment testing. This can give you a better insight into an individual, sometimes even a better insight than they have into themselves. One of them is Wonderlic. Wonderlic is actually a whole bunch of testing. It's a testing product. I've used the mental acuity, and many people would ask why I would test for a mental acuity type of situation. I worked for an organization where they had benchmarks, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But they determined that to work in the shipping department, you need to have a 16 on a Wonderlic. I think a 40 is the top on it, 39, 40, something like that. So you need to have a 16. And I had made the decision to hire 2 people through my tenure there, and the first part of my tenure there, that had 14s. These were hardworking people, had excellent work histories, and things like that. And I had to terminate both of them. And the reason was not because of their work ethic or their desire to work. They did not have the mental acuity to be able to do the job. And no matter how much training they were given, and it just wasn't going to work. So I put those individuals in a position not to be successful, and that's definitely something nobody as a supervisor or a human resources person wants to do. You want people to be successful. So that is one thing that is very good about Wonderlic. Also, it lets you know how adjustable somebody is. Somebody can be very adjustable if they have the desire and they have a high enough mental acuity. Another one I used is a DISC-2, and it's a temperament or personality assessment. And I like this test because it would break down a lot of things. First of all, there is a lot of background goes into this testing in a sense that it's pretty hard to fool it. It'll tell you at the end if the person has a high level of deception. It breaks it down into 4 personality types, and based on those personality types, you can set benchmarks as to what will people be successful in what areas. And what this helps you with, and what I like about this test, is it helps you put people into positions they're going to succeed at. Things that feel comfortable for them, that goes with their natural personality. That doesn't always mean that you shouldn't hire somebody who doesn't score high in the area of, that would indicate that they'd be good in sales. That doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't hire them, but it gives you an idea that this person is not naturally a salesperson. And I say that because quite often people can adjust, especially like I said, if their mental acuity is hard, but you can run into burnout really easy if somebody is working in an area they are forcing themselves to be comfortable or to try to be comfortable in. And by the same, it also lets you design your plan for hiring, so to speak. So, for example, if I have salespeople, real true salespeople, not to belittle salespeople, for example, but true salespeople have a tendency to not be very good at paperwork. The sale is done, they're done with it, they're ready to move on to the next sale. Teaming them up with someone whose personality and comfort zone is really on those details can develop a really good team. And so you can develop teams within your library, within your organization, that allows you to be successful and provide a high level of customer service. Skill set testing, pre-evaluation. Main reason I use this was when I was at East Central University. We had a large number of international students, and we introduced a coffee bar. And in our first semester, it became apparent to me that many international students did not handle U.S. currency. They predominantly used debit cards and did not know how to make change. And so I would give a skill set test as part of the pre-employment, not as a determining factor so much as to a jumping off point, whether we were going to need to train them on how to make change, to be able to be successful in that job. This can go for everything. If you are having problems with shelvers, you can locate a test, work with your human resources department to get you a test. Wonderlic actually probably has one out there for people that know how to do alphabetical, who understand numeric, chronological, whatever order you're wanting to address. And these tests help you identify personality strengths, weaknesses, and blending. Blending is when you have conflict between departments. You can sit down quite often, and if you explain to people each other's different personalities, often you can get people to work together. And establishing, like I said, benchmarks. You can determine what you are looking for in greater detail, and help you actually find that employee that you make good hires the first time around. And all good librarians like to do our research, and you need to do it with your employees. Check your references. A lot of times you're going to call and you're going to be sent to Human Resources Department or a supervisor, and they're going to cut you off. They may tell you your dates and all. But you can ask for your current employees. Do you know X, Y, and Z? If you're in a small town, they may have gone to school with them. They may have worked with them. And a lot of times your employees will tell you if the person is not someone that they want to work with. in the sense that if, you know, they don't want to have to be staying late to clean up somebody else's mess. What you also have is you can ask their past coworkers. A lot of times past coworkers or coworkers they're working with now will give you some insight into what type of employee they are. And you can, personal references can be helpful. They can tell you, oh yeah, they're the best person in the world, and you ask them, okay, if I were hiring you to do a job, how would you feel about that? And there may be a very long pause before they tell you that it might not work out as well as they anticipated. References is no problem as long as you get authorization. I do make sure you get authorization from the individual to do those reference checks. And often it's not what's said that's important or how it's said. I may not be able to tell you that an employee is not rehireable, but how I tell you they're not rehireable can say a lot. So taking that information in as part of the process. Conflict with new hires. Quite often, not quite often, sometimes you'll have a department that people been in there for a long time, or you have somebody who will be very dominating and they want to run the department a certain way, and they can run off new hires really fast. They don't like them, they can't learn, they're not doing their job. It can be very confrontational and be very stressful for everybody within the organization. Get your team involved. There's nothing out there that says that, no hard rule that says that supervisors and managers are the only people that can interview people. Wouldn't leave my entry-level staff to their own devices, but they can be definitely involved in that process for a lot of reasons. Is one, they often know that job better than you. Even if you've done that job, chances are some aspect of that job has changed. And they may have an insight into what is needed or why you're not finding the right person. Accountability. Hold them accountable for that, being involved in that recruiting process. And ownership. It's really, really, really hard to beat yourself up or be negative toward yourself if you make a wrong hire. That is a trick that I've kind of learned in the hiring process. If I've had a really negative department or group of people, they're not going to be near as hard on themselves as they are on you. So get that ownership in there. And understanding personality traits also helps in that aspect of it. And shadowing. I do this with my circulation desk. If I have somebody I'm interested in, I usually, it's not because it's negativity. It's not. I have a wonderful team. But I also want their feedback on how they feel somebody will fit within the organization. Quite often they will see things I don't see. And I do a shadowing process prior to hire. That allows everybody to kind of see what is expected of the position and how the person responds to the job tasks, etc., and how engaged they are. I've also found shadowing to be very, very successful if you have conflicts between departments. Say your cataloging and your circulation department are at each other's throats because each feels that the other is not very considerate of their job duties. Having someone sit with somebody else, say to walk a day in their shoes, can be very helpful. When I worked at Coca-Cola Enterprises, we did this a lot. We would actually have the truck drivers sit with the accounting people for a day, and the accounting people sit with the truck drivers for a day. So they understood, the truck drivers understood why that paperwork needed to be in order when it was brought in, and the accounting people would understand the need to hustle and dealing with customers. So it would help with communication, and it can be used at all levels. A new kind of term that has come out is onboarding, and it's really an expansion of what would probably originally been called orientation. Basically, integrating a new employee into the organization, giving them tools they need to be successful. And this can be a 6 to 12 month period. Most people, traditional orientation is a couple weeks, maybe a month, and we're realizing now that that's too short of a period of time. You're given so much information in a short period of time, you don't really have the opportunity to absorb it. So we're expanding that out. Orientation is in that, of course, which is your basic paperwork, what your benefits are, things like that. Handbook is usually given out at that time. Reviewed annually if it's current. If it's not current, and you don't have the power to make it current, which is a strong possibility. I don't know that reviewing it yearly, but I encourage reviewing it yearly if a new agreement or new ruling, new whatever comes out, regulation, having everybody sign off on it, that they've had the opportunity to review it. But reviewing the handbook 2 weeks in, reviewing it again at 6 months in, gives people the opportunity to ask questions that they just really didn't know they needed to ask at 2 weeks in. Benefits, making sure that your employees have a good understanding of your benefits. That's money in their pocket. That's a way for you to keep people employed with you. Not only do you get your paycheck, but if you are going through a divorce and you need to talk to somebody, you can call and speak to a counselor for free. Or doctor on demand, you don't have to pay a co-payment, which will save you X amount of dollars in co-payments opposed to going to the doctor. Plus, then you don't have to go to urgent care on the weekends. Making sure they know their benefits. You don't have to know them forward, backwards, send them to HR, but knowing enough to know that they're there. I've worked places where people have been there 10 years and didn't know that there was certain benefits available. Training is a very big part of onboarding. I think we tend to forget that everybody learns differently. We talk about that a lot in school. It's the same in the work environment. 3 major aspects of learning or ways of learning: audio, visual, hands-on. Most of us learn in a combination, and you will be surprised how many people do not fully understand how they learn. That's, again, where your library, questioning your library skills come in, into asking people how they learn and helping them learn the new skills and through that transition period. Repetition. And repetition doesn't have to be with somebody sitting there. That is a misconception. Sometimes giving people the tools they need, watching them go through it, and then letting them fumble their way through something is a very good training opportunity for them. And it sometimes makes it, under less stress, a more successful one. And ISO 9001, 2701 is something that has nothing to do with libraries. You will probably not know what I'm talking about, but it is International Standards of Operations. And what this is in manufacturing, to be an ISO 9001 company or 9000 company, is you have to have written instructions for everything. And this is something that if you want to look at doing procedures, would be a good place to start, because literally everything is tied back to the very beginning of when you can literally hand somebody manual, and they can do the job. I've actually been the guinea pig many times because they quite often knew I had no skills out on the operation floor. And this is a good way if you're wanting to put together a training manual that is really, really good. This is a good place to get some information and some ideas on that. The pain of evaluations. I think if you ask any supervisor, at some point in time, evaluations has probably been their most dreaded aspect of human resources. It's definitely been many employees have lost a lot of sleep over upcoming evaluations. And it really needs to be a tool for improvement. Excuse me. I left my water cup at home. And it needs to first line up with your mission and your job description. You've told people through your job description, this is what is the job, and your evaluation is evaluating them on how well they do that job. Evaluations, like job descriptions, need to be changed. Not can be, but need to be changed as we evolve as organizations. And they need to line up with the job descriptions, and it needs to be weighed appropriately. You don't want something that's really not important to be heavy end of a job evaluation, and something that is really, really, really important have a very little impact on the evaluation process. Providing employees with copies in advance is really important. Usually what I do, I give, usually within the first 2 or 3 days of a new employee, I'll give them their job description. I actually give one during the interview process, but I'll give them one for their records after hire, and I give them their evaluation. They're not going to really tag that or attach that into anything really mentally until down the road. So about three weeks in, we'll sit down and talk about it again, and probably a couple more times within the first 6 months, so that they understand what they're being evaluated on, what is expected, etc. So clear understanding of where we're going. Again, like I said, make sure it's current. I do try to do a mid-year sit down with all my staff, and it's nothing formal. We talk about goals, where we're going, are we still on track? 12 months is a long time. You can't remember what all you were planning to do or where you were at 12 months ago. And it gives you just a kind of a reset opportunity there. I do it personally, probably about on a quarterly basis, to make sure that I'm still on track and I don't stray off, so to speak, which if I don't have a plan, I tend to do from time to time. I invite suggestions. What do you think is the most important aspect of your job, and what is the least important aspects of your job? And making evaluations as easy as possible is first understand the process. Evaluations are quite often tied to pay raises. And for that, there's basically two types of performance evaluation, evaluations. There's the STEP system, which is usually tied to government, unions like that. There's a set expectations. When you meet those set expectations, you move on to the next step. Performance evaluations are just that. How well did you do the job? Did you meet your goals? Was a certain percentage of improvement made, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest thing that people run into and causing conflict in evaluation process is not being upfront and transparent. And that can be everything from being late, getting somebody's evaluation done, to them expecting a higher raise than what they get. Be upfront. If you're not going to, if the evaluation is due September 1st, you're not going to get it done till the end of September. Let them know. And this is a production issue, because people will spend a lot of time worrying about that performance review, especially if it's tied to a promotion or money. And if they know that it's not going to come along until 3 weeks down the road, they will be focused more on their job. Also, they are often going to want to know, is it going to be retroactive if there's a pay raise, etc. And those are things you need to be upfront and transparent about. Don't make changes to the evaluation right before you go in to evaluate people. I've seen this done several times. I've had it done to me, even on a bonus structure. If you're evaluating how well somebody's done, they should have the opportunity to know what they're being evaluated on. Also, you need to fight for your employees sometimes on these things. I've gone in to systems where we've changed from a step system to performance as a manager, and I sold it in as a true standard performance based evaluation system, only to find out that it wasn't, and having to come back and be very upfront and transparent with my staff on how I didn't get the right information. So that is definitely can be challenging from time to time. I've also been in the position where I have been promised raises and then have come back and said, well, sorry, your class or your level or your classification wasn't entitled to a raise. So somebody somewhere made a mistake. Generally, that's where human resources needs to step in and try to get that resolved. It shouldn't generally fall back on employees. But if it does, again, you may have to be upfront, transparent with your employees. And it should never be a surprise. You should never sit down at an evaluation and yourself or your employees be surprised. They should know everything that you're going to discuss before you discuss it. So, making it easier, take two. Self-evaluations are really helpful, and they are very painful for people who do not know how to do goals. It can be a very painful training experience and learning experience, but once they get that light bulb comes on, it is like a whole new world for them. It is a step in a development process that is exciting to watch. They'll also give you insight into emotional intelligence, especially if you have somebody who is it's not my fault type person. You may see a very big discrepancy in where you rate them and where they see themselves. And that may be something that you need to sit down and talk to them about. Okay, I rated you at a 2 and you rated yourself at 5, the most excellent. What is the skill set that you feel you bring to the table that merits that rating? And it could give you insight into how somebody views their performance. Goal setting, like I said, goal setting, once somebody gets to that point, it's the ownership, buy-in, they're invested. They want success and they're ready to take the team to the next level. Reprimanding and terminating are also challenges that don't have the pattern of coming around every year, hopefully, that your evaluations do. Biggest thing is as a supervisor or manager is if you make that decision, you take ownership in that. And when I say that, you do it face to face, if at all possible. Over the phone if you have no other options. And when I say that, no-nos, not via email, not via text, not via voicemail. I actually have known people be terminated by email. If you have enough guts to terminate me, I would hope you have enough respect to tell it to my face. And for that reason, I take it very seriously to sit down and talk to my people, whether it's a reprimanding or in cases of termination, do it face to face. And don't be known as the 4:45 Friday supervisor. That is painful. I've been in that position, and it's like, oh my gosh, I made it to 5 Friday. It's not because it was a tough week. It just means that you didn't get written up or terminated at 4:45 on Friday. That is stress. It's a lot of stress, whether you realize it or not. Yes, it's easier because you don't have to deal with any turbulence within the department or organization, because it may level out a little bit over the weekend. But also gossip can go wild in those 2 days. So it's really not a beneficial situation most times. And if somebody gives notice, if at all possible, let them work it out. There are times it's just not beneficial to your organization, but from a morale aspect, letting someone work out their notice is usually a good thing. Sometimes if they're a very good employee, you may want them involved in the recruiting process and maybe even training process, and they can help with that transition. I've known organizations, you turn in your 2-week notice, you're out the door. It doesn't matter. And that is a really morale issue, and it plays to individuals' value. What is my value? If I have a better opportunity, I have no value here anymore. If my mother gets sick and I have to take care of her, I have no value. And it can really play to the morale and the productivity of your organization. Positives of reprimanding, or how to come up with a positive reprimand. Hope I spelled that right. You need to have a witness. Don't make it, I say, not a coworker of the employee. In my case, I would have to call in someone from HR or my supervisor generally. I do not want another librarian or another clerk sitting in on a coworker's reprimand. That's not fair to anybody. They're not paid to do that. To me, that's something that is tough, and that's why I get paid the big bucks, quote unquote. Focus on the facts, dates, times, actions, not personality. Don't, even if it is a personality issue, how they talked to a customer, patron, you don't want to focus on the bad attitude, but rather how the customer service was delivered. So you want to be factual. Clear with your expectations. I expect you to be here every day at 8 o'clock. It may require an improvement plan, and if so, you want to outline that. It may require training. Clear expectations of what you expect and when you expect it to happen. Give a deadline for your improvements. We expect this to happen immediately. We expect to see a 50% improvement in your shelving errors by the end of July, which is 4 weeks out. Give a deadline for improvement, or expect to go with those expectations. And I call it the expungement / release date. When are they kind of out of the corner, so to speak? If it's an informal reprimand, I will tell my staff if the problem is resolved, we don't have it anymore. This was the last time we'll talk about it. If it's a written or a formal verbal and it has to go into their HR file, I will tell them that it will appear on their annual review. And depending on how they approach it from here forward will determine how big of an issue it is. I will definitely tell them that the issue has been resolved in the valuation, if in fact it has. And in some cases, things will actually come out of the HR file. Here, I think things stay, I think it's 5 years, a write-up will stay in the human resources file. And I let people know that this is not permanent. You can redeem yourself and move forward. And that usually helps it become something that isn't so overwhelming and that they feel that they can't move forward or past it. Creating an environment is also a very important aspect in being successful with your organization. And one of those things is you can't wait for them to die or retire. I think if you've been in management long enough, you've had one of these people who you're like, oh, just 2 more years, and they retire. Today wasn't too bad, so I will make it through tomorrow. They're going to retire in 2 years. Can't do that. And the reason you can't do it, it's not fair to your other employees. It is a morale dragger down, for lack of better terms. A lot of times we do this because we know it is going to be very uncomfortable for us as supervisors or managers. We may not have the support from human resources. We may not have the skill set. These are times when you need to work with your human resources department to help you through these. But you need to do them. And sometimes it may be a kicking, screaming, all out war you feel like in your life. In the long run, it's got to be done. You need to do these things, not necessarily for yourself, but for your employees. You need to take care of it. Make sure you equal opportunity to all. And I would say that in making sure that your entire team has opportunities to take part in training, that everybody knows what their benefits are. Sometimes we have to sit back and evaluate ourselves. Make sure we aren't playing favorites, because it's easy. It's easy to look over somebody. If you have an eager beaver over here who wants to take every training and wants to do every project, every task, and you have somebody over here who's maybe a little more reluctant, it's easier to forget to ask them if they want to do training. Do you want to take on the project? They may feel that they're ready to do that, and that can be a very big step in their development as an employee. Being fair and objective in that process. We talk about whole librarianship. We got to look at our whole employee too. There's no way they're ever going to leave work at home or home at work. I hope I said that right. Let me think about that. They are going to come to work with baggage. It's impossible. We're human beings, and we need to look at and be respectful of that. We need to set boundaries, though. May need help with human resources to do that, but you need to make sure that you have a set of boundary level. But a lot of times, once you embrace the whole employee, you'll find that there's qualities that are within that person outside of work that are great benefit to bring into the workplace. I know within the last 3 months of our whole COVID-19 pandemic, we have been working, though close to the public, and we've learned a whole lot about each other. And that has been very beneficial in making us more understanding and open-minded to working with each other. Sexual harassment and racial training needs to be a constant thing. We kind of joke about it sometimes, especially sexual harassment. But those of us who have been in the workforce for a while, it's not the same as it was 20 years ago. What was acceptable 25 years ago is not acceptable today. It's not appropriate. And we need to keep that in the front of our minds. We need to keep our staff cognitive of and aware of where we are, what we're doing, and how we are representing ourselves to other people, and how other people could be portraying or interpreting our actions. Walking up to another employee and just putting your hand on their shoulder and leaning over the computer to talk and look at something may be something that nobody at the office thinks about, but may be perceived as by others as sexual harassment. So we need to be open to that and definitely keep it in the forefront of our minds. Address issues timely, whether it's a sexual harassment claim, issue of racism, a issue with a hostile work environment. Your Human Resources Department has a team in place that if any of these things take place, this team is brought in, they are within your organization, and they will review this as a fair and objective way. Usually it's addressed initially within 24 to 48 hours, and ideally it will be resolved within a week to 10 days, start to finish. I have been in a situation where I had an employee file a harassment. No, what was it? Hostile work environment. I was asked him to do his job, and he picked and chose his job description items he wanted to do. Followed to the letter of how to go about writing someone up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Did it in private, did it in writing. And the problem for me was I know that it was turned in. I know everybody in my division knew it was turned in because they were all called in and interviewed by Human Resources, but I was never approached. And there was about 3 or 4 months there that I had this looming over me. When was I going to have some resolution? And I never did. And it was a very painful process. And as a supervisor, it really made me feel like I was not able to do my job. So that made me very aware that anytime somebody has a concern, you want to try to address that in a very timely manner. Even if that means you don't have answers or updates, let them know you don't have answers or updates. Let them know that you haven't forgot about them. So that can create a more positive environment. HR nitty-gritty. These are the things you just need enough to know to maybe keep yourself out of trouble or know when to call Human Resources. FMLA, Family Leave, Medical Leave Act. I apologize, I left one of those words out. These are extended leave for births, adoptions, or medical issues. The standard is 12 weeks. It can be for mothers or fathers. So fathers are entitled to take that time too. It is 16 weeks if the individual is taking off to help somebody returning from military who is going to need medical assistance. The individual, it can be either for yourself or it could be a medical issue of somebody who you are their primary caregiver. This doesn't mean you're going to be one of 6 people that's helping with grandma. This means you are grandmother's primary caregiver, and you're allowed to take that off. There's a whole bunch of complications in it. There's paperwork a mile long that changes periodically, and every organization can set different parameters on it. But if you have somebody come in and talks to you about one of a medical issue, or they're possibly adopting or excited about having addition to their family, this is something you probably want them to talk to their HR department about. If you don't have one, you probably want to talk to your legal counsel or do a lot of research yourself. Workers' compensation covers injuries at work or that have occurred because of work. So the idea is to relieve the responsibility of the individual if they get hurt due to something that happens at work, either accident, negligence, whatever. Obviously, the injury at work could be a slip and fall, whatever. Main thing is you want to know your procedures. My first and only workman's comp claim I've ever filed as a supervisor was actually on myself. I slipped and fell and broke my hand and had to have stitches. And I go down, I've wrapped up in one hand, I'm opening the handbook and I look at the list of doctors that are identified as our contacts, and half of them are dead and half of them are retired. So that's not a good time to find out that your information is not up to date. So you need to know the procedures. If somebody declines medical assistance, they went to sit down, the chair scooted out from behind them, they bumped their head, they insist they're fine, document it. I even document it and say to the effect that the individual understands that they can seek medical attention later, and because you want people to get medical attention if they feel they need it. There can be excessive fines and late reporting of workman's comp situations. If you feel the investigator in the workman's comp claim feels that an employer has withheld benefits, there can be fines and all kinds of situations. So you want to make sure that people understand if they need medical assistance, they can get it. If it's Friday afternoon, they say they don't need assistance. Sunday afternoon, their ankle is swollen the size of a basketball, they need to know that they can go to seek medical attention. So if you do not, if you're not sure, you need to make sure you know the policy and procedure ahead of time so that you can make sure that your employees in that situation are informed correctly, because starting a claim off as a medical claim and on your health insurance is very hard and time consuming to go back and get everything straightened out as a workman's comp claim. Plus, like I said, you can end up with fines for not reporting. So you want to make sure you get that straight. Unemployment. A lot of people now are dealing with unemployment. I actually got a unemployment claim filed on me. Asked my boss if there was something I needed to know had I been working for free the last week. But unemployment is not expensive, unlike workman's compensation. Workman's compensation is expensive. That's why you often have safety managers and things. You want to make sure you don't have injuries at work. Not only do you want your people to be safe, you don't want to have those claims. Unemployment is really not that expensive on the whole of things. Very seldom have I ever questioned unemployment. Unemployment is only due an individual if they worked a certain amount of time and if they were terminated. That could be fired because of lack of performance, not able to do the job, or there is not work available at that time. So if they quit, not an option for unemployment. I do contest those if somebody quits. That's why you'll find sometimes people or organizations will push people to quit because they don't want to pay an unemployment claim. If an individual blatantly violates a core principle or ethical principle of the organization, I have contested unemployment, and I have contested unemployment when people have decided not to return to work, which did result in us terminating them. But I had work, they were capable of doing it, they chose not to. It put me in a bind, so I have argued it. Unemployment, though, you go through a council. So anytime you're approaching something like this, you want to document. You will have to state your case. It's not a precedent-driven decision-making process. I say that as I have had two people who did the exact same thing, who resulted in their termination, which was a violation of our code of ethics. And one person ended up getting unemployment, one person did not. And basically, it's whichever judge you get in front of, hearing judge on that. So those are three things that you definitely want to get your human resources department involved in. Hopefully I gave you enough information just so hopefully it'll stick in your mind if the situation comes up. Another big thing about human resources is helping you create a buy-in and getting your employees to take ownership of your organization. That is a big part of human resources, and that can be through, again, making sure they know what their benefits are, making sure they have opportunities for training and advancement, making sure that they have a fair and safe environment to work, that there isn't favoritism, they're not going to feel that their job is in jeopardy. I have worked places where you literally, you're worried that you might not have a job at the end of the day simply because of favoritism. You got to be open to being wrong. We expect that our employees are going to make mistakes. We expect that they're going to be wrong, and we need to be open to that for ourselves. And knowing, listening, and observing your team, that is something that will help you develop a stronger team and reduce your turnover. And why I say that is not everybody is motivated the same, and not everybody identifies success the same. I have two employees here in the office. One person, if success to her would be telling her, if you come in today and you work till 7, you can take off 2 hours early on Friday. That is success to her. The second employee, that is not success. Those 2 hours of not being at work would drive her nuts because she feels like she is supposed to be at work. To her, rewarding her verbally, making people aware of things she's done, praise is definitely a measurement of success and motivation for that person. So knowing what your team needs and doing that through maybe some pre or post employment evaluations, having your human resources come in and work with you to negotiate or interview your team to get to know them better, providing you with tools and training, that is what they're there for, is to help you out. A little bit extra on team building. These are some things we've done in the past at different organizations that really I felt brought you together as a team. Again, the whole goal is you want to be productive. You want to be at your highest level of production. That comes from retaining people, developing their skill set, and getting them to be invested in your organization. Believe in what they're doing. Community charities, I've actually worked for small organizations who've developed their own charity where people could have so much put in a month, and then they had a committee who decided where it'd be spent. Wellness programs, and we all know as librarians there are a ton of grants and opportunities out there to implement wellness programs. A lot of times your health insurance companies will provide you all kinds of things. In fact, Delta Dental just sent us a whole bunch of toothbrushes. training you, which is training university, quote unquote, within your own organization that aren't always necessarily work-related education opportunities. A lot of communities have people that will come in and do trainings for free. You will have banking organizations that will come in and do it for your patrons. They'll come in too and do how to do savings, how to do XYZ, how to set up a budget for your employees. Doing those as a lunch and learn type situation where you bring a sack lunch or you do a potluck is a no-cost way to invest in your employees and their continuing education as individuals, and going back to the whole person aspect of employees. So going back to the very beginning, human resources, how to get the most out of your two-letter department. Hopefully I've given you a little bit of information to give you a better idea of what human resources does. They are there to help you. They're there to help your employees. They're there to help you develop your organization and your team. And quite often you may not know what you need, but they are there or should be there to help you through that, navigating that sometimes rough waters. And here's my personal information, or contact information. I don't think I mentioned, but my master's is in human resources, and Jessica mentioned that I do teach or have taught human resources. So that's kind of how I came about doing this presentation. And I'm going to pass this back to Jessica because I'm sure she has a long list of questions.
Thank you so much, Jolene. I do have a very long list of questions, too long.
Oh, good.
End of this presentation, so I'm going to pick and choose a few of them. So going back to, I guess, evaluations, but more setting about expectations. You talked about the process you have at the beginning when you have a new hire to give them the eval in advance, revisit it maybe twice, a couple of times or a few times during their first 6 months. Do you have any suggestions for continuing those conversations around expectations as employees continue on in the organization, like years down the road, say?
That's where I personally like to do a mid-year sit down where we pull back out that evaluation. I do try to touch base with my employees on a monthly basis. How are you doing? How's your project doing? Blah, blah, blah. But the sitting down and looking at it again, where were we at 6 months ago? Do we feel like we're on track of where we want to be in another 6 months? What has changed? Something may have totally changed, and we need to totally ditch that evaluation because that is not, even remotely what this person is doing anymore. So bringing that person in and just having a dialogue, at least mid year, and that gives everybody an idea to bring it back to their forefront. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you. Another question I had was in your conversation about reprimands and termination. And you mentioned to have it in person, that you have a witness who's not a peer. I assume that's for more formal reprimands. Because then there's also, there's kind of like the spectrum of when is it coaching, when is it like a less formal coaching conversation, and when does it start getting into an actual reprimand, and how do you navigate that?
I think everybody has to kind of create their own line. Mine is if I am going to document it in a file, even if it's only my personnel file here for my staff, because I keep a separate staff personnel file for my employees that has every training they've done, everything like that. Any compliments, anything they get goes into that file. If I make a note in that to document something at an annual review, I'm going to have somebody sit with me, and we're going to talk about it. Now, if I have somebody who is consistently taking a 25-minute break, I'm going to bring them into my office and say, you know what, let's talk about this. Breaks are 15 minutes. I'm seeing consistently that you're taking a 25-minute break. Is there something going on that I need to be aware of? Sometimes there is. I mean, sometimes they're dealing with a terrible situation at home, and they're needing some extra time on the phone. And but sometimes it's not. They're just taking advantage of the situation. Things like that, that's a coaching situation. In my mind now, if I don't see improvement, we're going to, even if it's a verbal, after that, it's going in your record. And I would bring someone in at that time. And it's going to depend how comfortable you feel with the person. If this person is constantly questioning things you've done, is constantly, going above you in the hierarchy, then you're going to need to have a witness anytime you speak to them. But like you're saying, I wouldn't drag everybody in for coaching, because I think most of us coach daily, and it's not always negative. It could be trying to push that employee outside of their comfort zone because they're capable of it, but they're very hesitant and maybe nervous about it. And those things I wouldn't bring extra people in on.
Thanks.
That.
I'm just going to hit you with one more question, and then I'll take advantage of your email address there and send you the rest.
Okay.
So as a supervisor, the prospect of trying to be aware and current on all of the various things that I need to be generally aware of, like workers' comp, making sure I'm thinking of all the procedures if someone experiences harassment, all these things. What do you recommend to at least know enough all the time that if someone does break their hand, I'm not panicking, thinking, oh, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do right now?
First of all, the main thing is knowing enough to know that you don't know. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And knowing, okay, this is potentially a sexual harassment situation. Somebody comes into my office, they feel they've been sexually harassed. Take a minute, step back, and that's where you're going to document the situation, and you're going to get human resources involved. They're the ones that have, who stay up on top of all the rules, the laws, all that stuff. You're just need to know enough to know to take it seriously and to document it. Same with workman's comp or workers' comp. First thing up, your employee is health and well-being is most important. That means calling 911, and you don't think about anything else till later, that's fine. But knowing that when you get the opportunity and you're at the place, okay, now I need to do some documentation. Now I need to get hold of human resources. They're going to guide me and tell me what I need to do, but I know I need to have details. I need to call somebody. That's one of the main things on that, is knowing enough that you know you need to get somebody else involved. And that, I think, is where a lot of people can end up in trouble or in over their head, is they don't know when to ask for help because they don't know that they need it until they're in a situation where they've asked questions at an interview that they shouldn't have. So these are questions you shouldn't have asked, and nobody told you you shouldn't have asked these questions. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate that. Okay, well, I'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for presenting, Jolene, and thank you to everybody who attended this session today. If you enjoyed this session, I'd encourage you to think about joining your OLA division. So that'd be public libraries, university and college, or Oklahoma School Librarians. And that'll give you lots more opportunities to learn and connect with library staff all over the state. Please remember to fill out a session evaluation in the OLA Conference app, and we look forward to seeing you at many more sessions this year. Thank you.